Hey, everybody. Welcome to our second lecture here in the section where we're looking at the election, US presidential election. This one's on Joe Biden and his climate plan. I thought I'd play just a short clip here from the second and final debate, which made some history for being the first time climate was featured as a major topic in a presidential debate. And if you can watch the whole thing, I recommend it. But let me just play this. This clip got a lot of interest. Let's see if I can get the sound to work.
You close down the oil industry?
By the way, I would transition from the oil industry, yes.
Oh,
I will
that's
transition.
a big statement.
It is a big statement.
That's a
because
big statement.
I would stop.
Why would you do that?
Because the oil industry pollutes significantly.
I see.
Here's the deal. But
That's
you
a
can't
big
do
statement.
that. Well, if you let me finish the statement, because it has to be replaced by renewable energy over time. And I'd stop giving to the oil industry, I'd stop giving them federal subsidies. He won't give federal subsidies to the gas, excuse me, to solar and wind.
Yeah.
Why are we giving it to oil industry?
We actually do give
All
it
right.
to solar and wind.
We
And
have
that's
one
maybe the
final
biggest
question.
statement in terms of business. That's the biggest statement.
Okay.
Because
We have
basically
one
what he's
final
saying
question,
is he is
Mr.
going to
President.
destroy the oil industry. Will you remember that, Texas? Will you
Okay.
remember that, Pennsylvania, Oklahoma?
Vice President Biden, let me give you 10 seconds to respond, and then
Ohio.
I have to get to the final question. Vice President Biden.
He takes everything out of context, but the point is, look, we have to move toward a net zero emissions. The first place to do that by the year 2035 is in energy production, by 2050 totally.
All right. One
Is he
final
gonna get
question
China to
both
do
of
it?
you. No, we're finished with
Is
this.
he
We have
going to get
move on
China
to
to
our
do it?
final question. We
No,
have to
I'm
move
going
on
to
to our final
rejoin Paris
question.
Accord and make China abide by what they agreed to.
All right,
That'll
this
cost you
is
$1
about
trillion.
leadership, gentlemen. And this first question does go to you, President.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. I'll give you a sense of it. We're going to come back to this. See if I can get this all the way up to the top. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Sorry about this. I probably should have done this before we started the video. But you know what? Life is crazy. And that's just the way it is. So, but actually, I'm glad I'm scrolling through this because it gives you a sense of how thorough and detailed and long the Biden plan for the climate, plan for a clean energy revolution and environmental justice is. It's really detailed. We're going to get to that in a second. With Akbar's help, though, I want to do a new share. Boy, I'm going to keep him busy today because we're going to bounce around. I'll turn off the computer sound. Is that right, Akbar? Let's see if that's right. And you know what? Boom. I'll put me in the corner. It's kind of cold. Got my hat on. Here's Akbar. Oh, he dropped his weapon. Hold on a second. Okay. All right, we're here. Let's click this thing. Make it full screen for a little bit. Okay, so yeah, lecture 27, Joe Biden, fracking and climate change. I want to talk about fracking. Let me get into this a little bit. Here's what I want to do. It's pretty simple. We just looked at that Trump-Biden climate debate. The part I didn't play, I probably should have also played that, but you can watch it on your own, is when they debate fracking and Trump accuses Biden of wanting to ban fracking. Well, I think the fact of the matter is Biden's plan is to end fracking on federal lands and, as he said, over time, right, phase out fossil fuels entirely, which would mean the end of fracking. So we've already done that bit. I want to talk about fracking because that has become such a big issue. It was a big part of that particular debate because it struck some people as a surprise that Biden would talk about phasing out the fossil fuel industry, but it shouldn't strike us as a surprise, right? Because we've been looking at this for a long time now. And if you take climate change seriously, we know that we're talking about an energy transition. We know that means that we need to transition away from a fossil fuel-based economy. The big question really is how to do that. How fast can it be done? What are the costs and benefits of different ways of doing that? That's where I think the debate is legitimately focused, right? So I want to talk about fracking, and then we're going to go back, like I showed you briefly, and walk through a little bit of Biden's climate plan, which you saw is very detailed and comprehensive. So that's the plan today. Um, what is fracking? People have been talking about it. I don't think I've had a focus on it yet, and this is something I've studied quite a bit. You can Google me and find some of my things on this, but let me just try to give you a kind of fracking 101 and put it in a bit of historical context for you as well, because I think it's fascinating actually when it comes to the character of Joe Biden, who sits at this interesting transition. Okay, anyways, fracking is short for hydraulic fracturing. Look, there's two kinds of oil and gas formations out there, conventional and unconventional. Conventional oil and gas formations, when you tap into them, they flow upwards more or less under their own pressure. Unconventional formations, of which the US has quite a few, are so tightly locked up into shale, this rock formations, that when you dig a traditional conventional well into them, you don't get much out of them. You need to find a way to go in and fracture, break up that rock formation to get the gas or the oil to flow out. That's what this graphic is showing you. There's really three main parts. There's what's going on the surface here. You've got a lot of computer guided systems telling you where to drill. When you look at down here, let me use my little arrow. As you come down the well bore, you can see it turns horizontally. This is another important technological breakthrough. Horizontal drilling allows you to maximize contact with the productive zone, in this case, the Marcellus Shale. And then the third part, really, so you've got computer guidance and controls up here on top with a lot of pump trucks and sand trucks sending water and chemicals and sand down this well. You've got the well turning horizontally. The other important part is when they get down here initially, they will ignite explosive devices here that were called perforating guns that will perforate both the drill pipe and the surrounding rock, creating these holes. They then pump under enormous pressure, water laced with chemicals and sand into those holes to fracture the rock, allowing the oil and gas to flow out and up. This is a little blow up of that. Now, why the sand, you might be saying? Well, the sand they call proppant. The sand is there to hold those fractures open so that oil and gas can flow past it. It's amazing how much is used in this process. I can't go into the details, but one interesting detail is depending on the well, okay, there's a lot of variability here depending on the geology, but it's not unusual to have a mile-long train's worth of sand poured down every well. So a very resource intensive process. The chemicals are diverse and mixed. Some of them are publicly made available. Others of them are secret. There's questions here about water contamination, all sorts of stuff we can't get into. This is just a quick brush through. Where are these shale formations, these unconventional formations? Gosh, this is a little bit of an old graphic, but close enough, although really we've discovered a lot here in Colorado just off the Front Range that if I put a more recent map up, sorry, you would see that. There are some in California as well too, but anyways, Pennsylvania, the Marcellus Shale, and Texas, out here in the Permian Basin, the Barnett Shale, where UNT happens to sit just on the very edge of that, down here in the Eagle Ford, there's a lot in Texas and a lot in Pennsylvania. So you saw in that debate when Biden said over time he's going to phase out the oil industry, and Trump said, remember that, Pennsylvania and Texas, right? This is the politics of climate change. How do we handle this issue given the political reality that people depend on this industry? Some people work directly in these industries. How do we get them on board with this energy transition? That's the tough political challenge, right? Zoom in on Texas a little bit. Yeah, there's fracking big time in our area. This is the Barnett Shale here. It's thickest and richest really right up here on the western part of the DFW Metroplex and just to the west of that. You know, Denton sits just up here. I'm going to zoom in on that area now and show you this is what it looks like. The Railroad Commission of Texas. is the state regulator for oil and gas extraction. They have a really neat, I'll put this in your notes if I remember it. If not, remind me and I'll send it to you. They have a great website that's interactive, and you can look at all of the oil and gas wells. In fact, it's really gas wells, natural gas on the Barnett Shale. There's really not oil here. All these little spidery guys, these red ones, are conventional vertically drilled wells. When you see these pentagon shapes, this is the surface area. So this is where you would find the wellhead and the condensate tanks on the surface. And then running under the surface, these lines are those horizontal drills, like in the image I showed you earlier, that terminate here. This is the end of the well bore at those little spiders here. So these are the horizontal drilling pads. You can see just how many, they're all over the place, running underneath, in this case, the Fort Worth Airport. This is Denton County and Wise County over here. And I think this must be Tarrant County down there. One more thing I want to show you, this animation. Here's Denton, I've circled it for you. So, and I don't know if my face will be in the way when you watch this, but this is running roughly from 1998 to about, I think about 2010, showing you how rapidly first the black conventional vertical wells and then the red horizontal unconventional wells took over this area. It's really amazing. And this is kind of where I have been specifically looking at fracking. So my research so far has been less on the climate impacts and more on the local impacts. Okay, now back to the big picture though. Historically, so when did all this happen? Well, around the, look at this, this is US field production of crude oil. Right around here, let's say the mid 70s, late 70s, I'm putting at this peak here. This decline, right around there, Jimmy Carter was president and he got on television and he said, we're running out of oil and gas. And in fact, we were kind of running out of conventional oil and gas, but scientists knew about these huge unconventional reservoirs, but it just wasn't technologically feasible to get it out of the ground in an economic way. You could see there was a little bump, but then there was this long decline of US production of oil. And the thinking was, oh, well, that's it for us domestically. But the scientists knew, and the US government was working with the private sector, with the oil and gas industry, to develop this fracking technology, which finally, after years, decades, this was a massive R&D endeavor. It was like the Manhattan Project stretched out over decades. They finally succeeded. And when did they succeed? Well, about 2000. And it started taking off, and it really was at its heyday. It was at its peak around 2008, 9, 10, into 2014, 15. In other words, right during the Obama-Biden presidency. And so what I find fascinating about Biden is that he oversaw, as vice president, this historically unprecedented boom of the oil industry, record levels of domestic oil production. And now here he is as a presidential candidate, not even 10 years later, not even 5 years later, saying we've got to get away from this oil industry, the very oil industry that he was at least a part of really facilitating its flourishing during this fracking heyday, right? So I just think that's amazing position to be in for him personally, but also for us as a nation, for us as a globe, to have this fracking revolution happen right when we realize, oh, we've got to take climate seriously. And so the industry that has really benefited from this, now we have to find a way to phase away from that industry. That's why that debate back and forth, I think, is so fascinating. Okay, we're going to go back to Biden's climate plan, but big picture on that thing, because you saw how long it was. I put the link here and in your notes. You can spend time looking at it. I'm just going to hit a couple highlights. Here, I think, are the big highlights. What does he want to do? Net zero emissions by 2050. Net zero from the power sector, that is electricity, by 2035. What's the general framing of this? Well, green growth and job creation. And indeed, really, the Green New Deal. You'll see that he features that at the very top. And so I feel like I don't have to spend a lot of time walking through this with you because you know it. Now, we've talked about this. The mechanisms are just what we talked about earlier. standards, investment, and justice. And I think after just browsing through it for a few minutes, this will pop out at you and you'll say, oh yeah, this is part of that, what we're calling the new consensus of the left. And in fact, what's interesting is Biden's climate plan initially was much weaker than it is now, but he was pushed by the Sanders camp and Jay Inslee's camp to strengthen his climate plan into what's now really a comprehensive and ambitious plan. So, in a very stark contrast, remember last time to President Trump, who really, again, doesn't have a climate plan other than joining the Trillion Trees Initiative, which is something we should talk about later, but I don't have time right now. So let me, Akbar, get in here. Let me see if we can do a new share. Here. All right, I know I'm going on too long, but I just think this is so interesting. Okay, this is in your notes. Again, this is me yakking at you as we tour this together. I encourage you to tour it on your own as well. This is Biden's plan for a clean energy revolution. Makes me wonder if the Bernie Sanders camp didn't get to them with that revolution word. And environmental justice. Look at that. Remember the SIJ framework? There's justice front and center. So how is this organized? Because it's long. And for some reason, their website is a little wonky. It's hard to navigate. It's got a little preamble here about how important climate change is. And Biden keeps calling it an existential threat, which I find interesting. There's no greater challenge facing our country, he says. Now, remember I said the Green New Deal? There it is, right towards the top. Biden believes the Green New Deal is a crucial framework for meeting the challenges we face because it captures two basic truths. One, the US urgently needs to embrace greater ambition on an epic scale. And I think if you look through this, well, I'll leave it up to you to judge. I do think it's very ambitious. And two, our environment and our economy are completely and totally connected. Rather than being in competition, then we can have economic growth only if we hurt the environment. Again, in a way, this is eco-modernism. What they're saying is, no, we can have economic growth in a way that's decoupled from environmental harms if we get this connection between the economy and the environment right by investing in green technology, right? Green growth, green jobs. Okay, so that's the big picture. The other thing I just want to point out is we've talked about this 100% clean energy economy with net zero emissions no later than 2050. Okay, yeah, this is actually what I want to point out. There's 5 sections to this plan, right? That's section 1. Section 1 is about getting to net zero by 2050. And so that's mitigation, but also he's got some geoengineering in there. And I want to touch on that a little bit. Part 2, adaptation, right? Build a stronger, more resilient nation. Part 2 is much shorter than part 1. And he talks about working specifically with states and local communities to build resilient infrastructure, housing plans, insurance plans, right, for adapting to a changing climate. That's part 2. Part 3, working with the international community. You know he wants to get back into the Paris Agreement and et cetera, because this is an international problem. The US is only really, in the scheme of it, well, a major piece, but in some sense, a kind of small piece too, because our emissions are only a portion of the global emissions. Part 4, standing up to the abuses of power by polluters who disproportionately harm communities of color and low-income communities. So this is one of the aspects of justice, is pointing a lot of the investments into vulnerable communities and putting a lot of the energy, let's say the legal challenge energy, into protecting those communities. And then point 5, another part of the justice framing, fulfilling our obligation to workers and communities who powered our industrial revolution and subsequent decades of economic growth. This is a really interesting framing. It's like saying, look, we owe the fossil fuel workers a debt of gratitude for lifting us up into an era of prosperity. And so we need to find ways to work with them as we transition away from those fuel sources to make sure that they don't lose out. That's always been the challenge. That's the sticking point. That's why I played that little clip for you at the beginning. Politically, that is the sticking point, and it's really important, right? Okay, so I mean, you can go through it on your own. There was just something in point one. Boy, I got a lot here. I wanted to just point out the geoengineering aspects of this. So he actually has this preamble where he's quoting out of the climate assessment, the National Climate Assessment, and I think even the IPCC reports. Okay, here he gets to point one, achieving his clean energy economy. There's a lot of ways he's going to do it. Here you can see all these bullet points. Oh my goodness. Oh, and by the way, the first bullet points were about executive action. So I think this is kind of important because you're wondering, well, let's say Biden gets elected, but the Congress is not in the same party. What can he do? Well, he can do some executive actions, but then part two of part one, okay, on mitigation and net zero, is legislative agenda, so working with Congress. And I think it's here. Here you go. Look at this. I just thought this was, and again, I'm just highlighting one thing that's obviously not front and center, but it is a piece of it. Capturing carbon dioxide from power plant exhausts. In a way, this kind of carbon dioxide removal strategy, this geoengineering strategy, is maybe the most bipartisan, politically palatable thing you can do. That's why it's in his legislative agenda in case he needs to work with a mixed Congress. A lot of people can get behind carbon capture and sequestration because it doesn't phase out the fossil fuel industry, right? You can still burn your fossil fuels, you can still have those jobs. You're just going to create more jobs capturing the emissions from those other jobs, right? So I think there's some way of registering this that is fascinating. I think there was even more of that. Oh yeah, here you go. Going to work with the Blue-Green Alliance, okay, this alliance of environmental groups and labor unions on carbon capture, use, and storage. So there you go, right? Okay, so you got a job in the fracking industry. Well, maybe we don't actually have to phase that out. Maybe you can keep doing what you're doing and we'll work together to find ways to capture the emissions on the back end of it. That's the basic story there. Okay, but again, that's just one thing I want to pull out I find interesting. There's so much in there. I've been yakking at you too long. I hope this gives you a sense of, well, okay, a little bit on what's fracking, what's the deal with fracking, right? And how that really came to head during the Biden-Obama years. Gives you, and then looking at this climate agenda should give you some sense of just how stark the contrast is between these two candidates when it comes to this really important problem, climate change. So that's that. On behalf of Akbar, until next time, may the force be with you.